Everyone's talking about affordability lately. It's become the buzzword for an entire generation. Those folks between 20 and 40 years old who feel completely crushed and suffocated by the weight of modern economics. These people see their dreams getting stomped on because they simply can't scrape together enough money to buy a house, can't afford to take their families on a decent vacation, and definitely can't handle the skyrocketing costs of basic healthcare. This whole mess ties directly into massive questions about how our economy actually works and who's really running the show. But here's where things get absolutely wild and frankly a bit crazy. The logic coming from the left and the Democratic establishment is so twisted and backwards that it makes your head spin just trying to follow their reasoning. Let me break down their argument so you can see just how ridiculous it really sounds. For 4 straight years under their watch, we experienced brutal hyperinflation that crushed working families and destroyed savings accounts. We are talking about inflation hitting a devastating 9.1% back in 2022. And even when you average it out over those painful years, it stayed well above 5% consistently. That's not just numbers on a screen. That's real people watching their paychecks become worthless and their grocery bills double seemingly overnight. But now listen to this twisted reasoning they're pushing. They actually have the audacity to turn around and blame Donald Trump for having inflation rates of 2.6 to 2.7% during his first 10 months back in office. Think about how insane that accusation really is. They are literally attacking him for not instantly fixing the disaster they created with their reckless spending and terrible policies. They are saying he should be held responsible because he didn't magically erase their mistakes fast enough for their liking. Their whole strategy seems to revolve around this backward thinking. They want to obstruct him in Congress at every single turn, and they are already planning their comeback campaign for 2028 based on the argument that their policies which caused the hyperinflation in the first place should be given another chance because Trump hasn't brought prices back down to previous levels quickly enough. They are essentially demanding that he should have achieved not just moderate inflation or even low inflation but literally zero inflation immediately, something they never accomplished themselves. The sheer nerve of this approach is staggering when you really think about it. They break something badly, watch it fall apart, then blame the next guy for not fixing their mess instantly while simultaneously trying to prevent him from implementing solutions. That's their entire playbook right now, and they're counting on people not noticing this shell game. They're playing with economic responsibility. But there's another crucial element to this situation that demands our attention and understanding. The Trump economy right now is engaged in what I would describe as a high-stakes race against time. It is a race with incredibly important consequences because there is only 1 year remaining before the critical referendum of the midterm elections arrives. These upcoming midterms are going to be fundamentally different from typical midterm elections we have seen in the past. And the reason is simple. The Democratic Party has transformed into something completely unrecognizable from what it once was. This isn't your grandfather's Democratic Party anymore, not even close. What we are looking at now is essentially a radical Jacobin-style neo-socialist clique that has seized control of the party machinery and is driving it toward extreme positions that would have been unthinkable just a decade ago. The stakes couldn't be higher because if Donald Trump loses control of the House of Representatives during these midterms, the consequences will be immediate and severe. Within literally 1 week, maybe even less, he will face impeachment proceedings. That's not speculation or fear-mongering. That's a stone-cold guarantee based on everything they've said and done. Those impeachment hearings won't be quick either. They'll drag on for weeks, stretching into months, dominating news cycles and consuming government attention. They'll make the recent government shutdown look like child's play by comparison. Just a minor inconvenience. The entire agenda will get derailed. Progress will grind to a halt and chaos will reign. So the pressing question becomes, how does he prevent this nightmare scenario from becoming reality? Well, fortunately, the foundation is actually pretty solid when you look at the real numbers instead of the media spin. We currently have a fairly strong and healthy economy despite what the doomsayers predicted. Inflation is hovering between 2.6 and 2.9%, which is manageable and nowhere near the crisis levels we saw previously. It'll probably average around 3% for the entire year when we calculate everything, though we won't know the final numbers for a while. GDP growth is projected to hit around 3% for the year, which represents solid expansion in economic health. Although, interestingly, the Atlanta Federal Reserve Bank has suggested it could potentially reach as high as 4%, which would be absolutely fantastic news for everyone. The stock market keeps hitting all-time record highs, which means retirement accounts are growing and investor confidence remains strong. Remember all that media hysteria and panic we were bombarded with during the spring months? They told us with absolute certainty that the economy was heading for complete destruction. They predicted total disaster and painted apocalyptic scenarios. Well, guess what? They were completely and utterly wrong about everything. We didn't experience a devastating tariff trade war that destroyed the international commercial system like they screamed about endlessly. We didn't see a catastrophic trade war with China that demolished the economic interdependence between our nations. We didn't witness a stock market collapse that wiped out trillions in wealth. In fact, as I mentioned, the opposite happened with markets reaching record territory. We didn't fall into a recession despite countless economists and media talking heads insisting it was inevitable and imminent. Every single doom prediction turned out to be false, misleading, or deliberately exaggerated for political purposes. So, what does the Trump administration absolutely need to accomplish during this crucial race against the midterm clock? There are several critical objectives, maybe three main things that must happen to secure victory and prevent disaster. First and foremost, the administration has to constantly remind the American people that the economic record achieved within just the first 10 months is vastly and dramatically superior in virtually every measurable category compared to what happened during the 4 long years under Biden's leadership. The contrast is stark when you examine the facts honestly. You pump out an additional 1 million barrels of oil in just 10 months and suddenly the price of gasoline drops significantly. Last week the average price per gallon was $2.98. Compare that to the average of $346 under Biden's policies. That's a spectacular and remarkable achievement. Lowering gas prices by almost 50 per gallon, which means real money back in people's pockets every time they fill up their tanks. But here's the frustrating part. That incredible accomplishment isn't getting proper coverage or attention in the mainstream media because it doesn't fit their preferred narrative. The next crucial task involves reminding everyone that the left is actively and deliberately waging a coordinated war to stop progress in this economic race. Their goal is crystal clear. They want to stall this economy before the midterms arrive so they can claim things aren't working. How exactly are they executing this sabotage strategy? They're doing it by orchestrating the longest government shutdown in American history. The whole thing was completely incoherent when you examine what the Democrats actually did and why. I mean, seriously, they had voted repeatedly in the past for continuing resolutions without hesitation, and Barack Obama himself had delivered impassioned speeches about the immorality and fundamental wrongness of shutting down the government, calling it almost illegal to use shutdowns as political weapons just because you lost elections and didn't control the House majority. Then there's the whole Obamacare subsidy mess to consider. When Obamacare got pushed through in 2010, we were repeatedly told it wouldn't need subsidies and would be self-sustaining through market forces. Almost immediately after implementation, those promises were exposed as false. It was revealed to be exactly what critics had feared all along, a bankrupt idea requiring massive multi-billion-dollar subsidies just to stay afloat. The Democrats managed to get those subsidies approved, but they included a sunset clause saying the subsidies would eventually end once Obamacare supposedly became more market-driven and efficient. That transformation never happened, not even close. So for all those reasons and more, they shut down the government and created chaos. But let's be completely honest here, that wasn't the real reason behind their actions. The actual motivation, if you're being truthful, wasn't about causing immediate chaos with government workers in Virginia during recent elections, though that was certainly a bonus for them. More importantly and strategically, it was designed specifically to slow down the economy and create drag on growth. The exact same thing applies to Jerome Powell and the Federal Reserve's actions. For reasons that seem politically motivated rather than economically sound, members of the Fed who determine interest rate policy appear unwilling to lower rates so that ordinary Americans could obtain 30-year mortgages or 15-year mortgages at reasonable for 2.5% rates and actually afford to buy homes. I genuinely don't understand why this resistance exists unless it's political, but the pattern is undeniable and real. There are simply no legitimate indications that we are currently in a hyperinflationary environment like what we suffered through during the Biden years. Inflation is sitting at tolerable levels. Economic growth is good without being so robust that it triggers runaway inflation. There are even some promising indicators with tariff revenue collection and DOGE spending cuts, showing that budget deficits are finally being managed properly instead of spiraling out of control. They're not growing anymore, which is hugely significant. So there exists absolutely no valid economic reason not to address interest rates and bring them down to help families. Yet Donald Trump finds himself fighting battles on multiple fronts simultaneously. He's fighting against the Federal Reserve's stubborn resistance. He's fighting the economic damage from the lockdown strategy, and he's fighting this relentless media narrative claiming he caused hyperinflation and that we're heading inevitably toward recession. What does he need to do to win these battles? It is actually pretty straightforward and obvious when you think about the next year. Strategically, Trump must clearly and repeatedly articulate this simple comparison. This was what the Biden record looked like for 4 painful years. This is what I have accomplished in just 2 years of work. This was the terrible mess Biden left behind for me to clean up, and this is exactly what I'm going to do moving forward to make things even better. He needs to hammer that message constantly until it breaks through the media filter. Then finally, he has to effectively communicate and articulate that many of his policy agendas are designed for long-term transformation rather than quick fixes. They're not meant to show results overnight. They're building foundations for sustained prosperity. By that I mean he's vastly expanding federal land leases for energy production. He's aggressively deregulating the departments of Interior and Energy, stripping away bureaucratic red tape that strangled development. We've already witnessed oil production increase by 1 million barrels during just 10 months, but projections suggest we'll probably see increases of 2 or even 3 million additional barrels. That is going to have a dramatic and substantial effect on energy prices by driving them significantly lower for consumers and businesses. He's also pushing hard for expanded natural gas usage and electrical generation and promoting construction of many new nuclear power plants for clean, reliable base load power. What we are definitely not going to do anymore is waste taxpayer money subsidizing inefficient and extremely costly wind and solar projects like we foolishly did in the past. That change in energy policy alone will have measurable positive effects on electricity costs. We have never successfully deported in our entire history 2 million people either through direct coercion or encouraging self-deportation. We accomplished exactly that this year, and we are on track to match or exceed those numbers next year. That will ultimately mean 3, 4, possibly 5 million people who are no longer consuming taxpayer resources through social welfare programs that prove incredibly costly at state, local, and federal levels. Additionally, they will not be taking jobs away from American citizens who need employment. You'll effectively have 4 or 5 million people removed from the workforce who frankly should never have been in that workforce illegally to begin with. That shift will have tremendous positive effects on the economy, job availability, and wage growth for citizens. There are exciting new technologies emerging rapidly that will transform our economic landscape: artificial intelligence, advanced robotics, genetic engineering breakthroughs, and as I mentioned, numerous new nuclear plants coming online. All of these transformative technologies have been greenlighted and fast-tracked for development. Silicon Valley entrepreneurs and innovators are completely on board with these initiatives and investing heavily. These technologies will start kicking in and showing real results soon. If even 1/3 of Donald Trump's $15 trillion in promised foreign investment gets ratified and actualized into real projects and facilities, that alone will start having massive long-term positive effects on employment and growth. The tariffs have already brought in $400 billion in revenue, with projections suggesting maybe 400 to 500 billion total. Compare that to the last year of the Biden administration when tariff revenue was only $77 billion. If Donald Trump takes that $400 billion in tariff money and smartly applies it directly to reducing the deficit rather than just mailing out checks for 200 million people, then that will have a powerful and strong effect on financial markets, Wall Street confidence, and bond markets. Investors will see clearly that the president is seriously using $400 billion of tariff revenue to genuinely reduce the deficit and stop the dangerous ratio of federal debt toward GDP from climbing. That fiscal responsibility will prove very reassuring to investors and strengthen the dollar. Bottom line, and this is critical to understand, Donald Trump is engaged in a race against time. To get his message out effectively, he needs Americans to understand that the economy is already much better than the Biden economy was on virtually every metric. It's going to get dramatically better as policies take full effect, and people absolutely must not believe the media narratives, because the media, just like the Democratic shutdown and the Federal Reserve's artificial efforts to keep interest rates high, are politically motivated rather than truthful. But if everything works out the way that he has carefully planned, and if he continues doing the right things at the right times, then right around midterm election time the economy is going to take off spectacularly and vindicate his entire approach to economic policy and governance.